I love the games that take 100 hours to do. So I'm like a real Final Fantasy, Legend of Zelda, Witcher 3. Games are fun. A lot of times we just don't start at fun, and we should. Like, fun is super important throughout the lifespan, not just childhood. First thing is, I would not use the word addiction. It could just be that games are really powerful tools to help people feel an alleviation of their stress and to help people cope with specific mental health challenges, which is what the research tends to point to. When we talk about things like hate and harassment, cheating, and all that stuff, those are definitely a detriment to mental health. My concerns are primarily around trust and safety, and how do we rethink how we're approaching keeping these spaces safe. Most excited about the growth in accessibility to these spaces. So a lot of times we talk about games as if everyone has equal access. Not even everybody has the internet. I think games are just going to become ever more central to our day-to-day lives, especially with emerging markets, India, Turkey, Pakistan.
Did you know in 2022, the global video gaming industry was estimated to be close to $300 billion? Yes, you heard that right, billion with a B. And by 2033, it is estimated to be close to $660 billion. So a lot of people are playing a lot of games to make this the most profitable entertainment industries. In fact, the gaming industry makes more money than movie and music industries combined. But gaming often gets a bad rap. People who play video games tend to be seen as unsociable. There is an element of addiction that's often associated with playing video games. But is there any truth to any of this? To shine a light on this topic, I invited mental health researcher and psychologist Dr. Rachel Kowert to sit down with us for a conversation and help us understand what exactly is the impact of video games on our mental health. So if you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below to let us know what other topics should we be talking about on this channel. Welcome, Rachel Kowert. It is so nice to have you join us on our podcast today. You are really addressing the issue of mental well-being, which, as we all know, that's something that everybody's talking about and everybody wants to know more about. So you are also a research director at a nonprofit called Take This, where the focus is to cultivate mental health resources for gamers and game developers. My first question to you is, do you play video games?
I do. I've played games my whole life. I play less now because I have 3 children under the age of 10, so not as much time, but I do play.
What are your top 3 favorite games?
I love the games that take 100 hours to do. So I'm like a real Final Fantasy, Legend of Zelda, Witcher 3 kind of guy.
I've only heard about those games. I'm not a gamer, as they call it. And my kids are, though. As we can see how the whole industry is growing. So it is fascinating to see how they play and they play and they play. So when you play video games, how do you put those boundaries? Like, how many hours do you play? First thing.
A lot. I mean, less now, but there were definitely stretches of time that were longer than maybe they should have been. Boundaries are hard. It's easier to put boundaries as an adult because we have a really good sense of time and responsibilities, whatever. As children, it's a lot harder. Like, I have a lot harder time enforcing those boundaries with my younger children because they don't have a sense of time and all they know is they're having a good time and they don't want to be not.
So do you have certain tactics that you use when you are like, I have a pile of laundry to get through. I have all these research papers to read. I better stop playing Legends of Zelda.
Yeah, I do. When I have time to actually play, I set myself a time parameter. I tend to play nowadays more indie games, Unpacking or Thirsty Suitors, these games that you can play start to finish in like 20 hours or less because I just don't have the time to dedicate to Legend of Zelda is like a 2-hour, 300-hour game.
Oh, 200 hours. That sounds like a lot.
But it's so fun.
You are really actually inspiring me now. I'm curious. Yeah. We'll see. At the end of it, maybe I might just purchase a game.
There we go. Fingers crossed.
So Rachel, tell us a little bit about your background and what really sparked your interest in psychology, and then why did you choose to go into gaming?
I wanted to be a therapist. Yeah. For a long time, that was my goal. So I got my bachelor's at the University of Texas at Dallas in psychology. And then I went to Santa Clara University in California to become a licensed marriage counselor. And I realized very early on in that path that actually I don't want to be a therapist and that's way too much emotional labor and it's not for me. And I'm glad it exists, but it's definitely not for me. But I continued in that program because I knew that no matter what I did with my career, it was going to help me thrive in whatever I chose to do. I was learning so much about behavior and everything. So during that program, you have to do therapy, obviously, give therapy. And I was seeing many parents come in with concerns around online games. And it was like 2, 3, 4 parents coming in with the same concerns, which is my child plays a lot of games online. I see them alone in a room with headphones on and they're quiet. And I'm really concerned that something is happening here that's going to detrimentally affect their ability to engage in the real world. And it was peak World of Warcraft era. It was a lot of panic around what online games were doing, particularly to the social abilities for us to engage in the world. Now, at the time, I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft. I was playing 50, 60 hours a week. I was really into it. And so slightly selfishly, I was like, is something bad happening to me because I'm playing the same thing they're concerned about? But there wasn't any research. There was 1 or 2 papers out of Stanford. No one was talking about it. Game studies is not what it is today. Back then, there was nothing. It was a field that had not even really emerged as a field. So I pivoted. I finished my master's and I went to get my PhD and I focused on the social impact of online games to try and find the answers for the parents that they were having around these topics.
Which is, as you were talking about the parents' concerns, it sounded like you were talking about me, because that's exactly how I think as a parent when I see my son cooped up in his room for hours. What is it about video games that makes it so addictive? Can you explain the science behind it? If you had to talk about it at a dinner party, how would you explain that?
I do talk about it at dinner parties quite often, actually.
Sure.
Well, first thing is I would not use the word addiction. So the word addiction gets used a lot to talk about, I guess, a volume of play. It's kind of become shorthand, but addiction is a clinically protected word that refers to a specific set of behaviors. And in terms of game addiction, you've probably also seen that in the headlines. It actually does not have a scientific basis. There's no evidence to show that games are uniquely somehow driving, a quote unquote addictive behavior. So what I instead try to reframe is thinking about the reasons people are playing and if it's become problematic. So games are fun. We want to play them because they're fun. Why is it hard to get our children to not play them? Because they're fun and they're having a good time. Not only the game itself, but usually, especially teenagers, it's socially reinforced. So they're playing with their friends and, it's like the hanging out on the schoolyard. It's just a digital schoolyard. So it's going to be really hard to get them to not want to do that. But if it becomes problematic, if it starts to become a behavior that is preventing them from meeting their responsibilities, if it's preventing them from taking care of their bodies, if it's preventing them from getting up and moving around or doing their homework, then you have to have a conversation about, okay, what purpose is this serving to the point that now it's causing problems? And typically it'll be something like depression or anxiety or something of that nature. And that's really important because then the question becomes, how do we treat the depression and the anxiety? It's not how do we treat the game addiction, because the games are the coping strategy. It's like, how do we treat the behavior that's driving it? That now you don't want to take the games away as a solution to I think they're playing too much, because really it could be serving a really valuable purpose in helping them feel better and maintain their mental well-being.
And that conversation still needs to happen, and you still need to take steps to address the underlying issues that are actually causing that to happen. That is so fascinating that you put it that way, because that is not the angle we hear. We always hear it's the other way. It's the video games are causing these problems. And so once you put an end to the video games, all problems are solved. So you are saying it's a lot underlying problem. And so for everybody who's playing video games, it's not necessarily that everybody has a problem controlling their gaming limits, because we don't want to call it an addiction. But I briefly read a report where WHO did make a statement, or I may be completely misquoting here, but can you talk to me about what was that about?
Yes. So the World Health Organization moved forward a few years ago with this designation, problematic gaming disorder, basically.
Yes.
And it was strange at the time because the American Psychiatric Association, who makes the diagnostic manual that therapists use to diagnose clinical challenges in North America, they do not have gaming disorder. They have that in the back of the book as an item that needs more research. So it's like, this might be a thing, it might not be a thing. We're interested in it, but we don't know enough. So the World Health Organization going ahead and saying, actually, we're going to designate it was a big deal. And people like myself and other researchers in the field actually reached out to the World Health Organization and said, we actually don't think this is a great move. We don't know enough about it. There's a lot of conflicting research. And then Andy Shabilsky, who runs the Oxford Internet Institute over in the UK, he sent a letter very publicly to the World Health Organization saying, can you show us the research you based this on? Because it has to be based on a collection of research. And the public response was, it is impossible to produce that research, which is completely unacceptable answer. And again, just points to this idea that everyone wants an easy solution to a complex, but there is not the scientific basis to say that games are the source of.
Well, thank you for that clarification. So the game, I'm fascinated by the intersection of games and human behavior. right? So when we talk about games, there are, I don't know how many types. Are there genres of games? Like how do you categorize them?
Every person does it differently. Genres is a very common way to do it. A lot of people also just do it more broad, like single player, multiplayer, and then
Okay.
go into all the genres. So there's a million ways to classify.
So if I were to think of it as a layperson, I would say there are games you play by yourself, single player games, solo games on your phone or computer, and then there are games you play as a group collaboratively online. So has research been done about people who prefer single player games versus multiplayer games or social games, as you would say? Is there does it speak to your personality traits, or is it an indicator of something?
There's definitely been research that's looked into it. I think definitely would speak to preferences. I mean, I play single player and multiplayer, but it also depends on the mood, depends on the game, depends on the vibe. And I think that's very common of everyone's experience, that you don't tend to only play one single kind. You tend to kind of vacillate across genres and types. But the desire or motivation to play any particular game is certainly reflective of what you're looking to get out of it. So if I'm looking to play Minecraft with my friends at school, because we said at school we were going to play this together, right? My motivation is social. But if I just want to play a game because I had a really stressful day at school, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to look at anybody, I don't want to engage at all. Okay, I'm going to go to the single player kind of open world game where I can just explore.
Okay, so that doesn't seem to be clear-cut correlation of preferences, because it depends on the moods. I want to go back a little bit into, your area of research, mental health and gaming. So typically mental health is just getting a whole lot of attention across the board, right? But much more intimately associated with the mental health effects. What has your research shown? And how do you talk about it today?
The impacts of games on mental health is more positive than negative. That is the takeaway. And I think, even your body, it comes as a surprise to people when you say that, because the headlines you see, of course, are something they want you to click and instill fear and be afraid. And they're always something bad. But we see links between games and stress relief and social connection and learning and a sense of achievement, a sense of stress relief and relaxation. Games are fun. A lot of times we just don't start at fun, and we should. Like, fun is super important throughout the lifespan, not just childhood, even though we tend to decide it's not important when you're an adult and you should just be working. Fun is very important as an adult. It's been linked to even physical benefits like longer lifespan and that sort of thing. So just generally kind of big picture is the impact of games on mental health is very positive. And it's not limited to one specific kind of game or another. Again, it goes to preferences. I don't like any game where I'm being chased or have to do anything fast because it's too stressful. But my husband loves those kinds of games and thrives on the sense of achievement he gets from doing these really tough, difficult challenges. So what's good for one person may not be good for another, but all games hold value to have therapeutic value.
So why do gamers tend to face so many mental health issues?
This is a chicken and an egg question, because we do see a lot of studies saying there's high rates of depression, there's high rates of anxiety among people who play games. But to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that games are making you depressed or games are making you anxious. And I feel like that's the assumption. It's like, oh, it's because it's socially isolating, which it's not. Games are very social. And that must be why they're feeling this. It could just be that games are really powerful tools to help people feel an alleviation of their stress and to help people cope with specific mental health challenges, which is what the research tends to point to. It's the stance I tend to take because there's more evidence to support that that's the case. And in that case, again, going back to addiction, which is why you don't want to take the games away as a solution to, like, I think they're playing too much, because really it could be serving a really valuable purpose in helping them feel better and maintain their mental well-being.
You are a gaming family. Does everybody play games in your family? All of them?
All of them, all different kinds, which is really funny.
What do you have to say to parents like me? What sort of guardrails should we, I don't know if guardrails is a strong word, but how should we make sure that our children are reaping the benefits of gaming? And we don't really, how would we recognize when it's getting to be a problem?
It's a problem if over an extended period of time, I think the APA says 6 months or more, you start to see all other areas of your child's life being detrimentally impacted in a way because they are playing games instead of doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. So like school, like occupational, physical health, mental health, are they eating? Are they meeting their responsibility? Like when all of those things are falling to the wayside over 6 months or more, and instead they seem to be spending their time playing games or doing something else, like that's when you start to think, okay, what purpose is this serving? Because now it seems that you're using games as a way to avoid all these other things that you should be doing. Whereas that's totally different than somebody who plays 6-8 hours a day, every day during spring break. They're escaping as a distraction. They're escaping to have a good time. They're escaping to have fun. Totally different than escaping to avoid responsibility. So that's kind of the distinction I like to make. Because from the outside in, it can look very similar, but actually it needs to be prolonged and other areas of their lives falling to the wayside. What should parents do for the guardrails? The three things I usually say is be present, be engaged, and have fun. So be present is ask them what they're playing, look over their shoulder, know what they're buying from the store, the basic kind of levels of just having like one eye on what they're doing. Be engaged is either playing with them or when they're playing, have a conversation and engage in it a bit. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why do you like it? Who are you with? And a lot of the fears parents have is not knowing the answers to those questions. But if you just look over their shoulder for literally like 5 minutes, you'll get a sense of what the content is. You'll get a sense of who they're playing with. You'll get a sense. And the analogy I like to make is if you can sit through a 5-year-old soccer game, okay, you can sit through 5 minutes of asking your kid about Minecraft. We've all sat through the 5-year-old soccer game. They don't know what the goalposts are. It's awful, but we do it with a smile, right? We can do it for kids.
We love our kids.
We do. And the last one is have fun. Like games are supposed to be fun. And, my kids play games that I'm not good at and they ask me to play and I don't want to, but I'll do it and I'll fall into a hole and I'll die and they'll laugh and it's real fun for them. But that also gives me a sense of what they're doing and kind of like being engaged.
The question I have is, I think we briefly touched on this, the type of game that they play, but some of these games can look very violent. Right. There are like games that are the shooter games and, those kind of games. Should a parent be concerned when they see that their kid is playing those sort of games? What does that reflect?
It's hard to say because I won't know your child as well as you know your child. I can say that research has looked a lot at what the impact of these games are, and there's no evidence linking playing violent video games to any kind of violent behavior. There's been a handful of studies that look at how it impacts aggression, and those have found short-term spikes in aggression, and I think this is where the headline confusion comes because what that actually means and actually looks like from the scientific perspective is someone came into a lab, did a pre-test, usually it's word completion, so you'll see like K-I blank blank, and I walk in and I write kiss. And then I play 10 minutes of a shooter game. And then I get the same test. And instead of writing kiss, I write kill. And they say, oh, she's more aggressive. Does that really mean? Don't know. And I'm not being dramatic. Those are literally the methods used in these research that you then get the headline games make you more aggressive. But if you look at, the research as a whole, there's been thousands of studies in this space. There are no direct links between behavior change and playing this specific kind of game. So, parents can rest easy with that.
What are you working on nowadays?
These days, I'm working on the darker sides of the internet. I've spent my first 10 years really pushing against the stereotype of gamers and exploring like the impact on sociability and mental health. But for the last 2 years, I've been working on a project funded by the Department of Homeland Security, which is looking at the ways in which people are looking to leverage games for radicalization and recruitment for extremist causes. So it's a total shift and it's a little bit of a downer of a conversation, but it is really important to understand what are the gaps in our understanding about how we keep these spaces safe when we're looking at the most extreme forms of people who are actively looking.
We talked about the metaverse, and it is this magical land where you can go to work and play. So as I look at it, I'm seeing that a lot bigger chunks of our life might end up in the metaverse. Do you think that's going to impact human behavior and psychology? Because that's very different than spending 20 hours on video games. Like it's going to fundamentally shift the nature of how we are in a digital world and a virtual world. So what are your thoughts on that?
It is going to fundamentally change the nature of how we're engaging. I wouldn't say it's inherently negative. I think there's maybe a lot of fear that it's going to be inherently negative. But if you think about these digital spaces, think about games right now. It's the closest thing we have to a so-called metaverse game. You get to engage with people over the world. Roblox has live action translation across language. You can speak to people in different languages. The young people can lead a group of older people. The older people can engage with younger people. The benefits that being connected in this space offer are so great. I think we just need to start talking about and leaning into how do we really emphasize these amazing opportunities it provides, that this technology is accessible to a lot of people across the globe, and that we can start spending more time in here on these spaces, especially people who haven't necessarily spent time in these spaces. You don't spend a lot of time in these spaces, right? But you know what's really cool? Being able to go and meet a whole group of people from all over the world and figure out how to work together as a team and accomplish a goal. Like that feels great when you are able to do that. And you're learning a lot. You're expanding your worldview. You're meeting new people. You're meeting people you've never talked to before if you didn't have that opportunity. So I think it is going to fundamentally change our lives. Maybe it's the optimist in me. I really think it's more for the benefit.
But there are also issues around anything that when you are in a group of people you don't really know, you're also exposing yourself to the bad parts of the society that you might have not had access to. So as younger generations who are getting ready to be in that world, how should they sort of prepare themselves to be resilient or not affect them mentally?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about things like hate and harassment, cheating and all that stuff, those are definitely a detriment to mental health. That is clear. I think that there's a lot of optimism I have for the younger generation. And what I would want to share with them is remind them that they are the creators of this space. They are setting the cultures of this space. They are setting the rules and norms. People do not behave the same in all digital spaces. They adjust to the norms and the cultures that they're in. People act different when they play Roblox than they do when they play Minecraft because they're just adjusting to these spaces and what they deem as acceptable, what the community has deemed as acceptable. I did a research 2 years ago in conjunction with Nielsen. Nielsen did some data collection, and we asked these questions about how do you feel about these spaces that are toxic or unkind or unwelcoming? And it was actually the younger players, it was the 14 to 18, who were much more likely to say, I don't participate, I don't play, I just leave, I just go. They seem to have a much lower tolerance for bad behavior in the ecosystem than the older players. So I'm going to lean onto that to give me optimism that they will actually be the agents of change that we need in this space.
That gives me hope because as a parent, you want to make sure that, your kids are protected. At the same time, you are clueless on how to provide that sort of support because you've never seen that world. And I feel hope that they are going to be okay. The kids are going to be okay.
The kids are going to be okay. And also, just talk to them. Even something as simple as if something's making you feel uncomfortable, it's probably for a good reason. Or just because it happens, validating that just because it happens on the internet doesn't mean it doesn't matter. There's this idea that maybe it doesn't matter. It's like these feelings and these emotions, and these are very real. Online and offline is so fluid. There's not like a magical wall that separates them. And if somebody's being awful to you online, that's certainly going to impact the way you're experiencing the rest of your day when you're not online. So it's a tough line, but I think the kids will be
good. What excites you most about the future potential of gaming and the digital world? I can already hear all the optimism in your voice, but yes. What are you most excited about?
I am most excited about the growth in accessibility to these spaces. So a lot of times we talk about games as if everyone has equal access. Not even everybody has the internet. Like everyone does not have equal access to these spaces. But year after year, I'm hearing, of more developments in different parts of the world, in our country, our continent that we live on now, in growing accessibility and access. And I think that's actually what's most exciting because so much learning is happening there, so much communication and community building is happening there, and not everyone has access. So the more people, the better.
What are you most concerned about?
I have a lot of concerns. I know my optimism comes through, but there are definitely a lot of concerns. My concerns are primarily around trust and safety and how do we rethink how we're approaching keeping these spaces safe, because it's long been this idea of like, let's just bubble wrap it, which doesn't work and is not one size fits all, is certainly not a way forward that's going to work for everyone. So I'm most excited about being on the precipice of these conversations that are happening now around public policy and figuring out how do we actually safeguard these spaces in a way that doesn't safeguard out the best parts of the internet. Because you mentioned earlier, you don't know exactly who you're talking to. You're right. And that's one of the scary bits, but that's also one of the best bits and why we see so much positive outcomes when it comes to people are more likely to speak freely because they don't know these people. People can try on new identities because nobody actually knows who they are. Like that's also the really good part of it. So how do we maintain the good while mitigating the bad? And those conversations are really starting to come together now. So that makes me, I'm worried, but I'm excited about those conversations.
Healthy balance. That's how we would take it. How much of real world influence needs to also happen as parents, as educators, that we need to reinforce that? Is that need to happen? Even more so.
There's a dearth of digital literacy programs generally in the world, which leaves the onus of the digital literacy education a lot of times to the parents. I mean, I want to say that schools do it, but I don't think they do. I can't think of a single offhand example of a formalized program of digital literacy that children are getting. So I think that information coming from the parents is really critical. And it doesn't have to be real technical specific. Don't put the pressure of I have to know where all the reporting tools are and this and that and the other thing. You can Google it. There's YouTube videos. You can figure that out. It's really about having the conversation, the see something, say something conversation about these are your spaces. And if you see something you don't like, you say something and you figure out how to report it somewhere else, and you go somewhere else and you don't play with that person and you move on. And I think that those basic conversations aren't happening because a lot of parents are just like, it's games. Or I will just assume that this gaming company or platform has made it safe because they advertise to children, so it must be safe, which isn't always the case. So I think those conversations are critical, especially for your own peace of mind. I think a lot of times what we're focused on are like the far end of the spectrum, the really small amount of really bad things that can happen in these spaces, but they could happen anywhere on the internet, things like exploitation of children or that sort of stuff. But where I think the change really needs to happen, and where I think our efforts really need to go for the young people out there who are engaging in this space, is denormalizing kind of what we call the basic toxicity, the racism, the anti-LGBTQ speech, the misogyny. I think that that's actually the biggest danger that we see in the social space of games, rather than kind of like those fringe, really rare, really bad cases. And I think that the power for that change comes from leadership, but it also comes from the people who are in the space, about speaking out and saying, this is not okay here, this is not what we do here. And I know that can be hard, but also going back to the best and the worst of the internet, the fact that they can't see you and they don't know you should actually make it easier to have those conversations and stand up for the
because our channel is also about where the future is going in terms of science and technology, and gaming being such a huge industry. I wanted to, just ask a few questions around that. So how do you see the role of gaming and digital media evolving in the future now that we have so much more new capabilities? AI, AR, VR, just too many to name here. How do you see this field?
I think games are just going to become ever more central to our day-to-day lives, especially with emerging markets, India, Turkey, Pakistan. There's a collection of countries that over the next 5 years, their industry and their countries are growing exponentially, 15, 20%. And I think we're just going to start to have these more global discussions about the role that games play in socializing and in this future of the metaverse, digital spaces where we engage in day-to-day activities beyond just play.
What advice would you give to students or really early career professionals who are listening to you today and saying, this is really interesting, I love gaming, and I think I might have a future, I'm interested in pursuing this? How would somebody go about getting into this field?
I think the best advice I can give in like a soundbite is that there's no straight linear path, and that there's a little bit something for everyone. I feel like a lot of times people think about, I want to work in games, I must be an engineer, or I must be an artist. And those are certainly fields you can do. But there are psychologists that work in games. There are audio engineers that work in games. And nearly everyone I've met who works in games did not start there. I wanted to be a therapist. I started in academia. I know many people who had full careers in totally different fields before they pivoted into games. So just think about where your interests and expertise are, and there's probably a spot for you in the industry.
And what advice do you give to somebody who's interested in a research-based career like you are? How would they get started in that?
Don't take out student loans for your PhD. Find a fully funded PhD would be my best advice. They exist. They're advertised yearly. Look for those. And then research what, your area of interest is in. Again, they're game studies. There's hundreds of programs now that specialize specifically in game studies. And it could be the social impact of games. It could be mental health. It could be the representation of disability in games. I have a colleague who did that. It could be role playing and, identity formation. There's so many ways and so many things you could look into across fields, education, psychology, media studies, computer science. So again, there's a little something for everyone, but I would say find a funded PhD because they're very, very expensive. And I'm not sure I could ever, with a good heart, advise you go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to pursue a research.
Wow, that is probably the most important advice.
Right?
It comes from true wisdom and having gone through it.
Experience. It comes from experience. Not having a funded PhD, let me tell you. And now I realize they're everywhere and mistakes were made.
Do you see new sorts of jobs coming up, like in terms of, I would have never thought that's even a job?
Every day. I'm surprised at the jobs that exist, and also there's so many specializations. I was just having a call with a colleague today whose job in their studio is combat design. And so you think about, I have to be an engineer and I want to design games. Like there are so many, there's interface design, there's environmental design, then there's environmental sound, there's environmental art, and then there's so many things that you can do. It's way more than you think it is, I think, on the surface. And when you fall into the rabbit hole, you'll realize that there's something for everyone and plenty of jobs that I don't even know exist. Actually, I can't remember what it's called. I talked to someone today and they told me their job title and I had to be like, what is that? I actually don't know. I tried Googling it. It gave me nothing. And it made sense when they explained it to me. But see, that perfect example, just today, new job.
So there's opportunities. Go out and seek it. There's no limits. Thank you so much, Rachel. This was fun. I learned so much.
Bye.
See ya.